All right, I think we'll get into it. Welcome everyone, it's David Kearns here. Today's webinar is going to be on the topic of challenges in carbon and energy management. During the course of the webinar, there's a chance for you to join into the group chat. So just type your messages into the group chat and I'll respond to things as we go. One of the benefits of webinars is that they're interactive, they're not just static videos. So let's get into it. So a bit of an overview for you. First off, I'll just give you a bit of a definition of what do I mean by carbon and energy management. It seems to mean different things to different people and different companies. And then step through some of the challenges that I've observed over my many years of working in this field. Looking at business strategy and how often there's a misalignment with carbon and energy strategy. The very, very common use of very cumbersome manually processed spreadsheet systems, which is really quite surprising in this day and age. Timeliness of information, not knowing exactly where energy is being used in your business, and finally looking at collaboration and accountability. All right, so what do I mean by carbon and energy management? In broad general terms, what we're talking about is the combination of your systems, your processes, and the people that are in your business, which are used to measure, report, transact, and control your energy consumption and your greenhouse gas emissions. So some examples of things that we might be talking about are things like physical measurement devices in your plants. So this might be things that measure quantities of fuel that you consume, or power meters or things of that nature. We're talking about the various spreadsheets and databases and computer systems that you're using. We're talking about the interactions with and use of business processes and reporting. So often there's a tight interaction between the business systems that you use, particularly accounting and finance systems, and the systems used for energy and carbon management. We're talking about procurement. So procurement processes are involved in things like where do you get your energy, how much do you pay for it, in purchasing carbon offsets, if that's a strategy that you choose to pursue, if you want to get your net corporate emissions down, and things like power purchase agreements, which are not solely a procurement activity. They often are considered at a more strategic level, but ultimately become part of the procurement function once they're in place. We're also talking about the fundamentals of the plants that you're operating. So we're talking about operations. How do you physically operate your plants day to day? What choices are being made about the products that you're making, the type of energy you're using, how hard you're running your plant, and so on. And there's the plant design and technology. Much of your use of energy and use of carbon is really locked in by the design of the plant that you have and the technology that you're using. And so often the best opportunity to do something is when you're actually designing a new one. All right, let's go through the first point here and what's the issue. So the first one that I've seen a lot of is a misalignment of business strategy and carbon and energy strategy. So what do I mean by this? Ultimately, business strategy at the top level is what decides what your company is going to do. It's going to decide on the types of operations you're going to run, the type of products you're going to sell, and that drives everything else. And so that drives including your levels of production and your energy needs. So if your company decided to not produce a particular product, then clearly you wouldn't need to produce it and you wouldn't require any energy anymore. Energy needs and your production in turn drive your greenhouse gas emissions. So essentially business strategy affects energy strategy, which in turn affects carbon strategy. They're all tied intimately together. And so for that reason, it's very important that if your company is setting targets around its greenhouse gas emissions, all right, you need to be making those in line with your broader business strategy. So when you have things like plans for expanding your plants, or maybe using new materials, or changing your ore grades, or if you're an oil and gas company, maybe the well compositions are changing, that all needs to feed into your energy and carbon strategy. You also need to consider the impact of any external forces, in particular regulation, when you're setting your targets. So often government regulation, particularly these days, is very important. and will have a significant impact sometimes on the strategy that you put into place. You need to consider that. And a final comment here is that there's a very common emphasis in carbon and energy management on purchasing of offsets or power purchase agreements, PPAs. In my fairly strong opinion on this is that they should be the final steps in your strategy process. They shouldn't be the first thing you do. You should be focusing very much on trying to make your systems run as well as they can first before you step into those. So you really should be starting with things like energy audits, efficiency projects, upgrading your equipment, looking at new technology options. They will all help you to use less energy and produce less emissions. Once you've got those numbers down to more reasonable levels, then look at offsets and PPAs. The second issue that is very, very common, and I spend a lot of my time helping companies resolve this, is the very heavy use of Excel and spreadsheet systems, manually processed for the most part. So this is quite distinct from what you would see in modern accounting systems. So if you go to any significant organization, they rely on a heavy amount of automation when it comes to running their accounting systems. Oddly, when it comes to environment management systems or energy management systems, they fall right back on manual spreadsheets that people have designed themselves. And this causes some problems. So first off, if you don't automate, you're open to the errors that creep in when you're manually processing things. So transcription errors is a classic one. People will take numbers from a source, maybe even off a piece of paper, type it into a cell on a spreadsheet, and they get 2 digits around the wrong way, or they put the decimal place in the wrong point. If you haven't carefully locked down your spreadsheets, they might overwrite the formulae that are in there as well. As a general rule, things like Excel are a very good place for doing calculations, but they're not such a good place for storing data. So ideally, you should be storing data in a database or an ERP, like SAP, for example, a system that is actually designed for large-scale, secure storage of your data. The danger with spreadsheets is that they can be corrupted. If you don't have good backup processes, you can lose your raw data. Also, databases are just much faster to process things, and that comes up a little later when we talk about timeliness. There's a common temptation, particularly in larger organizations where you have many spreadsheets managing carbon and energy, to link lots of them together. This is really poor practice from an information management perspective, and you effectively end up with what the computer programmers like to call spaghetti code. It's just a tangled mess that's really, really hard to maintain and control. And it gets even worse if you start using macros in an uncontrolled way. So I would be I would warn you very carefully not to do that. So really, what should you be doing instead? You should be designing your systems from the ground up to be automatable, auditable, transparent, and able to provide timely information. And we'll get onto timeliness in a moment. That means give it the same thought and care and attention that you would if you were designing a new accounting system. Now, they're not as complex as accounting systems. The number of data points coming in is much less typically, although the complexity around your calculations can be higher. So that's something to consider. A thing that follows on from that is poor timeliness of information out of energy and carbon management systems. So one of the issues that we have is that if you don't have well-designed systems, often your reporting is historic in nature because it relies on a lot of manual processing, which takes time. And very commonly, I see companies that only do their reporting once a year, usually when government reports are due. And so sometimes they don't even realize that their system has gone off the rails months earlier. Let's say one of their instruments has stopped measuring things or their database has failed. Until you go looking for it, you don't know. And so it's impossible to drive business performance well if you're looking in the rearview mirror, if you're not keeping track of things in close to real time. Now, you're not going to get timeliness unless you try and automate as much of these systems as possible, because it just becomes too labor intensive to go back and do manual processing over and over and over again. Automation is really the key. And so the trouble that you have with all of this is that if you're guided almost solely by external reporting needs, you're missing a valuable opportunity to keep your energy costs under control. And so there are often market factors and short-term factors that can affect your energy costs, particularly in the power market, particularly if you're purchasing wholesale power. And also, you need to look at keeping your carbon liabilities under control. And that's very hard to do if you're looking back over the past year rather than looking at what's happening now. And the final point I'd put on that is don't neglect your forecasting. So think about how will your energy and carbon costs look over the next 1, 3, and 5 years. Are you prepared for that? Are you able to make investments ahead of time if you're finding your emissions or your energy costs are growing to get on top of those? Rather than waiting for the market to sort it out, it's important that you take control of the situation. And without forecasting, it's very, very hard to guess what's going to happen. Another one is not knowing exactly where, when, and how your energy is being used. So it's amazing how many companies you see out there have a gas meter at the front gate, a power meter at the front gate, and that's it. So they have their gross overall aggregated numbers, but they don't have any real fine detail on understanding where those uses of their energy go. And as the old adage goes, what you can't measure, you can't control, and what you don't know, you can't measure. So there's a few ways around this. One of the things you can do is undertake what's known as an energy audit. Here in Australia, we have what's known as ISO 3598, which is a standard that's a few years old now. What that can give you is a clear understanding of your energy use and its key drivers. So you then understand there are certain factors and certain variables in the way that you operate, which will have very clear, direct influences on your costs and on your emissions and on your energy use. So that's very valuable information. And energy audits are not particularly expensive, so I'd strongly urge you to get that if that's your situation. Once you've got findings from an audit like that, you can use it to drive things like you might have overdue maintenance. So a classic one is compressed air systems, which are full of leaks. I've seen that in maybe half of the industrial facilities I've been to over the years. If you do an energy audit and put numbers on these things, it's very easy to calculate financials for projects to actually go and get them repaired or even replaced. So you'll find often that there are very attractive investment opportunities that flow directly from those energy audits. And on an ongoing basis would be to install sub-metering. So once you know what your key drivers are for energy and carbon costs in your business, this issue of once you've done your energy audits, you'll get that information. You can install meters for gas and electricity and other energy use within your plant. So you don't have to rely just on what's coming in the front gate anymore. You can actually see in real time where your energy is going. So that's really valuable and gives you, again, feeds back into that timeliness of information that I mentioned just before. Another issue that is really more of a people issue is about collaboration and accountability. So I've got a picture there of some silos. Many large organizations are very siloed, and people do not talk very well across business units, even if they're in the same physical location. So there's sometimes an implicit understanding that people will take the time and effort to communicate clearly what's going on. And often that's not the case. Sometimes there are surprises that people are just not able to communicate clearly. Also, there's an issue of accountability for meeting the organization's energy and carbon targets. So I mentioned earlier about business strategy and that flowing through to carbon and energy strategy. Ultimately, you need to be very clear on who is accountable for those targets. So who's losing sleep if the numbers aren't moving in the right direction? We need people's accountability to be really clear. So how do we deal with that? Well, the obvious one is appoint an energy and carbon steering committee, which would be essentially appointed by the board and report to the board and or the executive. And they would let people know how things are going and provide some accountability. Also, make sure you appoint a responsible person within the executive to oversee the performance of your business in these areas. And so that should be included in their KPIs and flow through to their bonuses. So, make it directly worth their while. And finally, it's amazing how many businesses are still stuck in the 20th century with email. So there's a lot of modern collaboration tools out there. So there are tools like Slack, Google Suite has them, which enable a much more rapid collaboration across relevant people. It's a really good way to cut across those silos and help people to really understand what's going on in all parts of the business. So, you know, the old hierarchical form of the organization, it has its limitations. And in this day and age, you don't have to be stuck with that. So there's some good opportunities there for some modern tools. That's it from me. Thanks for tuning in. It's been great to have a chance to talk to you this morning. Hope you got something valuable out of that. I can hang around on the line for a little bit if there are any questions that anyone would like to have. So please feel free to contribute. You can type something into the chat if you like. So I'll stay on line for a few more minutes. So thank you very much.